If you are already aware about the new Digital Personal Data Protection Act and you are thinking as an organization how to perform the scoping for the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, this video is for you. Okay, this video will help you understand how to do the scoping, what are the steps that you need to consider as an organization if you want to follow the compliance as mentioned in the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. So I hope you found this video very useful, and if you have any comments, feel free to add it. Now you must be thinking as an organization, as a as a person who is in charge of making sure compliance in the organization, how to do the scoping for the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. So first of all, the step one is to identify the types of personal data that your organization is collecting, using, or disclosing. Okay, now what all this it includes both direct and indirect personal data. Now what is direct personal data and what is indirect personal data, you should understand. So direct personal data is information that can be used to identify an individual directly, for example their name, their address, their date of birth. Indirect personal data is information that cannot be used to identify an individual directly, but can be used to identify them indirectly, such as their IP addresses or device IDs, that they're using. Now, what is the step two? Step two here is to identify the purposes for which they collect, use, and disclose personal data. Now, what is the purpose that your organization is having for which you are collecting the personal data? You're using the personal data and you're disclosing the personal data. So, you need to have a legitimate purpose. This word legitimate is very important, friends, for collecting, using, and disclosing personal data, because legitimate purposes include providing services, complying with legal obligations, and protecting the interests of the organizations or its customers. So these are some legitimate purposes for your reference that you need to understand. Okay, only for which you can collect, use, and disclose the personal data. What is the step three? Step three is to identify the jurisdictions in which your organizations operate. Okay, because the Digital Personal Data Protection Act applies to organizations that collect, use, or disclose personal data of individuals located in India, regardless of where the organization is located. For example, if the organization is located in US or UK or Australia or anywhere in the world, but if the organization is using or collecting or disclosing personal data of individuals located in India, they will come under this compliance. Okay, so you have to understand this. Now, what is step four? Step four is to identify the types of data processing activities that they engage in. What type of data processing activities are you performing in your organization? For example, you must be collecting, you must be storing, you must be using, you must be disclosing, you must be transferring personal data across borders. Maybe some sort of different processing activities. You need to identify them. You need to understand them. That is step four. Then step five is to identify the risks to the personal data that you need to mitigate. Okay, because the personal data that you are processing might be having some sort of risks. What are these risks? Are these high risks or low risks? Can you accept them? Do they come in your risk appetite or not? All these things you have to understand, because this is personal data again that you have to make sure that you control. Okay, and you apply relevant controls accordingly. So risk to personal data can include unauthorized access, use, or disclosure. Again, breach of confidentiality, disclosure, accidental loss or destruction. Okay, destruction, loss of availability, and unlawful processing. So here you can see you have to make sure that you understand what are the risks to the personal data and mitigate accordingly. Now, how to do the scoping? So some examples of scoping questions that I am giving here as a bonus reference to all the organizations who are trying to understand this new Digital Personal Data Protection Act. So these are some sample questions, scoping questions that would help you, because somebody asked me this question of scoping lately. So I want to mention it clearly in this video. So what are the some example of scoping questions that you must consider? Number one, do you have appointed a data protection officer? Do you have one? Are you conducting data protection impact assessments? If you are not sure about what is DPIA, data protection impact assessments, let me know in the comment section. I will create a separate video for you just to make sure you understand DPIA. Okay, it is very important. If we talk about personal data, DPIA is the first thing that anybody will ask you, anybody will check on you. So you make sure you understand DPIA by heart. Okay, If you have any doubts on DPI, feel free to ask in the comment section. What are your obligations to obtain consent for the processing of personal data? How are you obtaining consent? Is the consent specifying the ways of processing the data and why you are processing the data? All these obligations should be clear in the consent form that you are providing to the users. What are your obligations to provide individuals with access to their personal data? Okay, how are you providing individuals access to the personal data? How are you doing that? What are your processes against that? What are your obligations to respond to data subject requests? What is the time frame under which, let's say, somebody asks about their data, personal data? What is your process? What are your frameworks in order to address those requests? So as an organization, what is your turnaround time for that? Because all this comes under compliance, which is a part of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. And what are your obligations to report data breaches? Again, you have to report all the Digital Personal Data Protection Act breaches, because that is why this has been created. Otherwise, there is no point creating all these frameworks in place. So I hope this video makes sense. If you have any follow-up questions, if you have any comments, feel free to ask in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye bye.